Good afternoon, Denver. What a thrill to be here. What a beautiful crowd. How many people in here feel like you understand what RFID is and how it works? Just get a sense. All right, that's a fair number. It's been encouraging to me over the 10 years that I've been working on this issue to see the number of hands kind of go up. First couple of speeches I gave, no hands went up, and then it was about 5%. We're up to a little over, I'd say in this crowd, probably about 60, 75%, so that's a great number. And I think it's a testament to the fact that a lot of people have worked really hard to get a lot of information out about this technology. There's been some really frightening developments, even within the last 24 hours that I'm going to be sharing with you today. But before I do that, I want to let you know how I came to be standing on the stage and how I came to be involved with the whole issue in the first place. And that is because when I was a little girl, when I was 8 years old, my grandmother pulled me aside, and we had just gone grocery shopping. We were putting away the groceries in her farmhouse kitchen. And she said, Kathy, because back then I was Kathy, not Dr. Katherine Albrecht. She said, I want to tell you something really important. Have a seat. And I sat down at the worn kitchen table, and she said, there's going to come a time when people will not be able to buy or sell unless they have a mark on their right hand or their forehead. That mark is going to have a number or a name. It's the mark of the beast. And I want you to promise me never to take it. And I looked around and I said, well, of course I won't take that, Grandma. She said, well, the people who take it will be eternally separated from God. It is one of the worst sins you can commit. And just want to make sure that you're aware of that. Now, my grandmother, bless her heart, was one of my favorite people, and she passed away within a year of telling me that information. And I then went on. I lived in California. I grew up in Los Angeles. I got involved in all kinds of crazy things, but I always kept my grandmother's words in the back of my mind. And about 15 years ago, I started to realize that some of the things that she had talked about that at the age of 8 made no sense were actually starting to happen. So back then in that little farmhouse, I said, well, I can't imagine a way you could buy and sell with a number. I'd never seen a credit card. I'd never seen a personal computer. Computers took up entire city blocks. Cash registers didn't have high-speed internet connections. It just made no sense to me how that would happen. So at the age of 8, I vowed that I wouldn't take the mark, but I also vowed that I would pass that information on to my grandchildren and their grandchildren, so someday, thousands of years in the future, when this happened, our descendants would know not to do it. Little did I know that I would not only see these things coming to pass in my lifetime, but that I would actually become an outspoken opponent of them. And here I am today, and I have my grandmother to thank for that. So let me start by just taking you into what RFID is, and then I want to explain how it's being used and how I believe it's going to tie in ultimately with some of the biblical prophecy that I think many of us were warned about as children. So first, let me explain what an RFID tag is. What you see on the left-hand side of this slide is a human fingertip, and that little tiny black dot is an RFID microchip. It's a little silicon wafer. It has been encoded with information, typically just a unique ID number, a 96-bit ID number. So a series of zeros and ones is encoded into that tiny microchip. Now, that picture is about 6 or 8 years old. Nowadays, they're about 1/10 of that size, or even smaller. So they're so small they could be mistaken for a little piece of dust. But the microchip by itself can't transmit information until it's hooked up to an antenna. So when you look at the picture on the other side, you see an RFID tag. It's a sticker, and the RFID microchip is in the center. And then what you see running around there is an antenna. And the way that works, so let me describe. Once you've got the tiny microchip in an antenna, it has no battery, it has no power source. It actually operates through radio waves that are sent to it by a reader, so it's called passive. Some people would try to convince you that being passive means that it doesn't pose a threat. The reality is there's no battery to wear out, so these things can last forever. And the way they transmit information is the X device that's being held in this gentleman's hand on the RFID tag contains a microchip in the center, and he's holding a handheld reader. When he presses a button on the reader emits a burst of electromagnetic energy, what you or I would call a radio wave. That radio wave is picked up by the antenna, and it's used as power. The power goes to the chip and gets the chip to release its information back to the reader, where then it gets downloaded or stored in a database. So that's the idea, and what the RFID industry and the retail industry have in mind is using these tiny microchips as a replacement for the barcode. So instead of a barcode, every single product on Earth, literally trillions of objects, would be embedded with their own tiny microchip antenna combination. And the idea is that readers would be embedded in the environment to detect the location of everything all the time. It's quite a bizarre concept. They talk about reader devices in refrigerators and medicine cabinets, doorways, floors, ceilings, pretty much everywhere we go, and let me describe that. When my co-author Liz McIntyre and I authored the book Spy Chips, we went through 30,000 different documents, white papers, promotional documents, confidential papers. We found all sorts of things. And after reviewing 30,000 different documents, which we put together in our book Spy Chips, we were absolutely horrified. We found, for example, that IBM has patented something with the very unsavory name of a person tracking unit. And what a person tracking unit is the reader device that can read an RFID tag, but they envision it embedded in walls and ceilings, in floor tiles, in shelving, literally everywhere you go. And their idea here is that as you buy the unique object at the store, the RFID tag in it has a unique serial number. It's kind of like a social security number for each individual item. And when you pay for it, a scanner at the check stand would scan your ID number off of the pair of shoes, for example, that you had bought, and it would link it up with your identity through a credit card. Now, what they ultimately want to create, they refer to as the Internet of Things. So the idea is I could take the unique ID number of any physical object, punch it into a database, and pull up information. Where was it manufactured? When was it transported? Who bought it? And where was it last seen? So it creates an enormous potential for tracking. Here's a company called Checkpoint Systems, along with another company called Sensormatic. They do pretty much all of the anti-theft technology in this country. And they've actually got plans to embed these devices into the soles of our shoes, sandwich them between the seams of clothing, or into between the layers of cardboard. So these could really be hidden and placed into just about anything. In its patent for the person tracking unit, IBM describes placing these person tracking units to pick up the tags in our shoes, for example, and put them everywhere. Their list, and I'm going to read it because I think it's so shocking, they want to track people in shopping malls, airports, train stations, bus stations, elevators, trains, airplanes, restrooms, sports arenas, libraries, theaters, museums, etc. In other words, every single physical place we go. As you walk into a doorway, the doorway could be equipped with an RFID reader, or if it's a wide open space, they can do it above and below you and sandwich you that way, so that these readers would be constantly sort of bathing you in an electromagnetic radio bath, looking for any tags that it could wake up and then read their information, and you might not even realize you're carrying those tags. Now, whenever I talk about this, and I've done a lot of testimony before government agencies and legislatures, the industry always wants to say, oh, that's impossible, that'll never happen, it's too difficult for us to get a read on these RFID tags. So I always refer them to this particular example. There's an amusement park in England called Alton Towers. And when you go to Alton Towers, they issue you a wristband. Well, inside of the wristband, there's an RFID tag. And as you go about the park, there are hidden in the park a series of RFID readers connected to video cameras. And as you walk by, they detect a wristband, the camera turns on, and it captures a minute or two of video of you as you're going down the water slide, as you're eating a hot dog, as you walk through the park. At the end of the day, when you go to check out of the park, there's a nice woman sitting at a table, and behind her are a whole bunch of video screens, and they begin playing back all of the footage of you enjoying your day at the park as captured through this whole network of hidden readers in the environment. So the way this is different from your standard surveillance camera is a surveillance camera normally watches the 20 feet in front of it, and then if you want to find something, you've got to scan forward and back through hours and hours of footage. RFID enables very specific tracking of individual people with the same network of cameras. Now you can say, tell me every time Katherine Albrecht walked by, and you can query 100 different cameras, and when my wristband was in range, now you've got those 100 different pieces of footage that's just me. So it creates an enormous potential for individual surveillance. There is even a version of RFID reader that does not require electricity. It is experimental at this point. There's a company called Enocean, E-N-O-C-E-A-N, that's working on it. And it literally gets power from the vibrations from the wind. So you can attach these onto trees and turn entire open spaces, parks and wilderness areas into RFID tracking arenas as well. Now, taking this to the next level, in the United States, as of June of last year, you can no longer leave and enter your own country without an RFID tag in an identity document. All new passports for the last several years have an RFID tag embedded in the cover. So if you take a look at this particular slide, see where it says electronic passport, and underneath it there's kind of a white flag with a circle and two lines coming out of it. That's the symbol, meaning that it is an electronic passport that has an RFID tag in its cover. You'll also see words that say sensitive electronics inside, be careful, et cetera, on the passport itself. Now, originally they had planned to use a passport that had a long read range, except we privacy advocates and security people had a fit. And we said that's a terrible idea. Americans could be traveling in foreign countries, and someone with an RFID reader could just scan the crowd, identify the Americans, and kidnap them or shoot them all. So we argued very vociferously that they needed to put some kind of protection on the passports, and they did. The chips on there are encrypted, meaning not anybody can read them. They have a short read range of just a couple of inches rather than 20 or 30 feet, and there's shielding fabric in the cover, so when you close it tightly, it forms kind of a Faraday cage or a tinfoil hat around the microchip. So that's good news. Now let me get to the bad news. Oh, and I have to share this with you. On page 20 of a brand new passport is the following quote. Is our world going away? Or excuse me, is our world gone? We say farewell. Is a new world coming? We welcome it, and we will bend it to the hopes of man. And that's Lyndon B. Johnson quote that they just thought to put in the new electronic passport. After doing the RFID passports, they hit on this new idea, which is to put it into a plastic card, sort of the size of a credit card or a driver's license. It looks kind of like this. You got your card. This is a Texas Instrument card blank schematic. It's got its microchip there sort of off to one side, and then it's got the antenna running around the edge of it. If you have a flashlight or a pen light, you can oftentimes see these in cards that you might have. If they have RFID in it, and you hold it up to the light and you don't see the antenna, it's not RFID. So in addition to the regular passports, the US State Department has begun issuing e-passports or passport cards that they say are cheaper and more convenient than the standard passport with the pages in it. These won't get you into Europe or outside of the continental United States or continental America, but they'll get you into Canada or Mexico and back again. So already, probably hundreds of thousands of people have applied for these cards to date. The problem is they didn't put any encryption on these cards. They didn't put any protection. They're readable by any RFID reader from 30 to 60 feet away. And the other thing about RFID is it can be read right through the things we normally rely on to protect our privacy, like pockets, purses, wallets, backpacks, etc. So if you had one of these in your pocket, and I were an unscrupulous person who wanted to track everybody at this conference, I could simply put an RFID reader in a trash can next to the door. And as everybody walked in the door, I could simply scan these right through their wallets, and you'd have no knowledge that I had captured all of that data. In fact, if we all moved to a point where we had these RFID tags in our wallets, or the enhanced driver's licenses, which also have RFID tags in them, then someone could literally walk through, maybe walk up and down these aisles, posing as someone just attending the conference, with an RFID reader in their backpack and capture the identity of every single person in this room. That's how this technology works. 30 to 60 feet away, anyone with a reader can pick up your unique ID number right off of your enhanced driver's license. Now, before you panic, these are not being offered in the state of Colorado. There are a handful of states right now, border states only, that are offering these, and you have to apply for one, and you have to pay an extra fee. So they're not being slipped into driver's licenses, and to the best of my knowledge, there is no one with one of these in their driver's license that did not request it. But I somehow wonder if the several 100,000 people with these things in their wallets understand what they're really carrying, or if they just think it's easy to get across the border with this. So the states doing it, just for your records, Washington State, New York, Michigan, Vermont, Minnesota just signed an agreement to do it, and Arizona, and Texas just signed an agreement to do it as well. Now, where this begins getting problematic is when you start thinking about the Real ID program. And I'm sure a number of people in this room probably fought hard against the Real ID program. I certainly did. That was a plan to take all of our state driver's licenses and turn them into national ID cards. And the Department of Homeland Security was saying, if you don't have one of these government-approved national approved Real ID cards, you won't be able to get on a plane, you won't be able to enter a federal building, a courthouse, you won't be able to open a bank account. We're going to require that you have this for everything. Now, we fought back against the Real ID. Christians and civil liberties advocates all over the country, state governments fought back, and we killed it. But recently, Janet Napolitano, who is the head of Homeland Security here in the US under Obama, she recently said that, fine, you won on Real ID, we're going to have a new program, it's called Pass ID, and we're going to base it on the Enhanced Driver's License Program. So what is she really saying? She's really saying, we're going to get rid of that Real ID, which didn't have RFID in it, and we're going to give you an enhanced driver's license that will have RFID. And that's when we need to double down our efforts and really oppose. So soon you may need one to board a plane, open a bank account, enter a federal building, or get a job. In an effort to cut down on illegal immigration, the government is proposing all sorts of identity requirements, ID requirements. And if you're concerned about the mark of the beast, I really believe that that's going to be the key way it gets implemented, by causing us to all hate our neighbors and be terrified of Maria and Jose taking over all of those really high-paying gardening jobs and toilet scrubbing jobs, and getting us all to be so full of hate and antagonism towards people coming into our country. And granted, they shouldn't be crossing our borders, I'll grant you that, but I think they're really preying upon that sentiment in order to push these kinds of programs forward. So I believe that the whole terrorism issue, all of these wars, all of this stuff is being used as a way to kind of get us saying, hey, it's us versus them, and those foreigners over there. If we all just had really good ID documents, then those foreigners couldn't get away with things like getting jobs and getting on airplanes, et cetera. Already several communities around the country have said you can't buy a home, rent an apartment, lease a house, or anything else unless you prove your US citizenship. Now, that may sound like a great idea until proving your US citizenship means providing a Janet Napolitano approved remotely readable RFID tag, and maybe you even think that's okay, but eventually that may mean providing an RFID tag embedded in your flesh. So I think we need to be careful when it becomes the easy argument saying, oh yeah, just make sure everybody proves their citizenship before they can do various things, and we'll all be fine. I think that's the road to damnation. You people have realized this, but the main reason I objected to Obamacare, in addition to all the constitutional violations associated with it, is because it will create for the very first time a national ID number assigned to all people that they will need in order to participate in health care. So you will have to have not only a card with a unique ID number on it, but you will have an electronic medical record that will contain all of your medical information. It's going to be in a national, essentially, clearinghouse where HMOs and doctors and government can peer into all of your medical records, and it's going to be based on a unique ID number. And if you do not provide that unique ID number, you will not receive health care. And eventually, the ID card could cover for all of the cards in your wallet. Right now, they're doing tests in the Middle East of exactly this proposal. I believe it is the nation of Oman that is taking its national ID card, incorporating microchips into it, and using them for payment, for transportation, for credit cards, for virtually everything that you currently use the plastic cards in your wallet for. So you could consolidate them all into one single ID card. Problem is, if somebody steals your card, then they've got an awful lot of your identity. Let me just read this. With virtually every adult in the nation carrying a smart card, private firms will gladly pay for the privilege of downloading their applets or their customers' smart ID cards. In other words, this particular gentleman, Rob Atkinson, has proposed that the government actually charge these companies. You charge Visa to have an applet that could download onto your driver's license. You would charge the Discover company or the bus transit company or whatever to install their information directly on your card. What he says here, an ATM card, a credit card, a garage access key, a frequent flyer number, a grocery store discount card, et cetera, and the improved cards would pay for themselves. Now, before you think this is a good idea, let me talk about what's going on over in China. China, in 2008, was the biggest RFID market on the globe, which shocked everyone because we all thought that it would be product tagging, those little ID cards, ID tags that they want to stick on all the products. But it turned out to be China because China placed an order for 1 billion RFID tags to place into its citizens' national ID cards. And China has been using those cards, which are linked up to a database containing a person's educational history, their work history, their health records, even their reproductive history, all in a single database. So if I were in China and I were a government official, I could simply point my reader at all of you, and I would get back your health histories, your medical history, your background, even your landlord's name and phone number would all come back onto my little reader device. That's happening in China today. And I should point out that it is American companies that enabled China to create that system. IBM, Dell, Cisco, and Hewlett-Packard all helped with the implementation of this essentially enslaving device that the communist government is using on its own people. Shenzhen, China is a bustling city in the south of China. It is high-tech, high-finance, and very wealthy, very busy center of a lot of China's industrial successes. Shenzhen also has been turned into kind of a living laboratory for surveillance technologies. In Shenzhen, from what we've been able to gather, they have hooked up the same kind of things in Alton Towers, the little video cameras connected to RFID readers in the environment, connected to listening devices. We know that during the Beijing Olympics, the Chinese government put microphones into the cabs and transmitted information based on, or of people's conversations to the government. So Shenzhen, I think, is a good lesson in terms of what we're likely to see here if we don't slow things down. 200,000 video cameras, by the way, have now been distributed across a single city. Now, let me talk about what's happening in the United States and what has been happening in the last couple of years. RFID tags are probably in this room right now, and they're not in your shoes or in your pants or in your consumer products as I originally feared and as the industry promised they would be doing by now, because we fought back against that. Instead, what they're in is your credit card. So isn't it interesting that a technology that many have sort of expressed concerns about the mark of the beast, that a technology like that, its primary dissemination right now in this country would be in credit cards, numbered payment systems. And in fact, if you open your wallet right now, I am guessing that probably about a third of people in this room have an RFID tagged credit card in their wallet right now. Those RFID cards can be read right through your wallet. If I had a handheld reader, I could just sort of walk within an inch or two of your pocket or your wallet, and I could scan the information out of it. And in fact, researchers at the University of Amherst in Massachusetts actually did that. They found that they could get a person's full name, their full credit card number, and any authorization that they needed. Oh, and the expiration date too, to actually use the card. So criminals obviously would have a field day with this kind of technology. You could just go into Yankee Stadium with your reader device and just capture tons of information, and that has actually been happening. Now, where this gets even more disturbing if you're thinking about the mark of the beast is that the RFID tags in your credit cards are now being used at the point of sale, or what we'd call the cash register. So you've got a little device, and you can see it right there. They typically look like that. There's one that's kind of sitting that way and one that's sitting that way. And you take your Visa card, your MasterCard, your Discover card, and you simply tap it to the reader. And a wireless transmission of that radio frequency microchip occurs, transmitting your account information directly into the cash register on the fly. These have been quietly installed in locations all over the country. Even in my home city of Nashua, New Hampshire, you can walk into the McDonald's, and there on the counter are gleaming RFID readers. I was recently driving through Connecticut, and at the rest stop, there is I don't think that's a picture, but it looks just like that. There's a vending machine, a soda machine, with one of these devices on it, RFID. And when I got in a cab in New York City, there was an RFID reader in the cab. So I'm sitting in the back, and it was just gleaming right at me in the cab. Now, it's a matter of time, I believe, before you won't be able to do these transactions in any other way other than using this technology. They want to phase out cash. Credit cards are not secure enough because there's all this identity theft and people using other people's account numbers. So there really is a move towards this kind of RFID embedded credit cards. If you want to know if you have one, by the way, you can look in your wallet, and if it says Pay Pass, or if it has a symbol that looks like the letter C, like sort of three nested C's backwards, I guess that'd be that way, three nested letter C's then that look kind of like radio waves, then that's RFID. And I would recommend getting rid of that credit card, frankly. RFID tags now can go on the wrist. Concerts around the country and amusement parks now are issuing wristbands that have RFID in them, just like Alton Towers. They're developing ways in amusement parks particularly so you don't have to pay cash. You just put a credit card number associated with your wristband, and when you want to go on a ride or you want to get some cotton candy or whatever it is, you just press your wrist up to the cash register reader device. payphones, vending machines, anything that requires some kind of an access, you can do that with an RFID wristband. Guess what? That's the same technology as implantable RFID, which we'll get to in just a moment. All right, we can't figure out why the Department of Homeland Security has issued its e-passports and enhanced driver's licenses, and why Janet Napolitano wants to roll that out nationwide using the least secure possible form of RFID. It makes no sense at all unless you consider one thing. The version of RFID, out of all the possible choices they could have made, that Homeland Security and the State Department chose, is the commercial form that ultimately is going to be replacing the barcode. Now, why is that significant? It's significant because all those readers and the person tracking unit that IBM wants to set up in museums and theaters and libraries and stores and sports arenas and such are all designed to track inventory, products. And if you have an RFID tag in your driver's license and you walk past an RFID scanner at a Walmart or somewhere else, it's going to pick up you as inventory as well. Now, they could have avoided it just like they did on the passports with the booklets, but they didn't. And the only possible reason that any of us can think of for them doing that is they want the driver's licenses to be part of that tracking infrastructure. There's no other explanation for it. Now, let me talk about some of the successes that we've had in opposing this. Now, this is an interesting story. Millions of dogs and cats around the world have been implanted with RFID microchips. What we discovered when the Verichip Corporation that makes the implantable microchip, we discovered that when they had gotten their FDA approval for an implantable microchip, the microchip encapsulated in a little capsule of glass that you can inject into an animal, they took the same technology and they got FDA approval to inject it into human beings. And they got that approval in, I believe it was 2004. But there was a catch. They forgot to tell the FDA that those microchips were causing cancer in laboratory animals and also in dogs. We now know that between 1 and 10% of animals implanted with these microchips develop fast-growing malignant tumors around the microchips. And tragic stories of dogs that have died as a result of these microchip implants have been coming into my office. People crying on the phone, talking about how their dog passed away after a microchip that they thought would save his life if he got lost actually developed a malignant tumor around it. So we worked with the Associated Press back in 2007 to report this story, and AP reporter Todd Lewin was just a dogged investigator. We put together a sheath of documents that had been published over 16 years in pathology journals and veterinary journals, and we proved the case. So this story that came out in the fall of 2007, Implants Linked to Cancer in Animal Tests, was an extraordinary shift, I guess, in the direction that this technology was going. Back in 2007, the RFID implant industry was going full guns on chipping human beings. They had trials set up with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they were chipping people. They had set up trials with an Alzheimer's community care center, and they were chipping people. In fact, they were planning on chipping 200 Alzheimer's patients along with their caregivers. They were chipping people on television. Both Good Morning America and the Today Show featured chipping as the greatest thing that's, the future for all of us. And then the good news was that this story came out right about the time the Verichip Corporation stock was trading at about $11 a share. We came out with this story. There's the Verichip Corporation doing the Alzheimer's patient chipping. And there's our protest. We actually flew down to West Palm Beach, Florida to oppose that right on the eve of the story coming out. And when the story came out, Blue Cross Blue Shield trials got canceled. I was contacted by one woman who had her chip removed. She said, I don't want to get cancer. And when I talked to the doctor who'd performed the removal procedure, he said he was removing all sorts of chips from people because they were all flocking in to get these chips taken out of them. So that was the good news. Kind of a disgusting process to get it out of you, by the way. And we watched Verichip stock drop from $11.60 a share to just 24 cents a share in a matter of months. Thank you. And in fact, at the bottom, Verichip Corporation receives delisting notice from NASDAQ. If you trade under $1 long enough, you become a penny stock, and you go on the pink sheets. And they had to petition to keep from going under in that way. And I have another piece of absolutely fabulous news. Within the last month, the Verichip Corporation has stated that it will no longer market the human implantable microchip because there's no market for it. So. Now, I don't know if we're out of the woods for good, but it's always nice to score these victories and kind of push Big Brother back into the cave just a little bit. So going from a place where television was breathlessly talking about this and health insurance companies were actually proposing doing it, I think it's a really good thing now that whenever people talk about implantable microchips, oftentimes under their breath they refer to them as cancer chips. Right. Now, back in 2003, and I'll give you just a sense of some of the battles that we've waged against this industry. Back in 2003, the Italian clothing manufacturer Benetton announced that it was partnering up with Philips Electronics to put 15 million RFID tags into women's garments. And when we checked it out, we discovered that they were going to be putting them into the labels of women's underwear. And what that means is that anybody with an RFID reader could scan women walking by and figure out what size and color of undergarments they had on under their clothing. So we brought this to the public's attention. We launched a boycott, the Benetton.com website. I'd say within a week of launching that website in 2003, I was doing interviews in Scotland, in Tasmania. I had to look at a map to even see where it was, down there by Australia. I was being interviewed in Sweden. I was being interviewed by NPR. All over the country and all over the world, people said, well, gosh, we don't want that. And as a result, the Benetton company canceled its plans and put an end to that particular RFID deployment. Thank you. Now, over in Europe, there's a place called the Metro Future Store, which is sort of a testing ground for these technologies by IBM, NCR, the National Cash Register Corporation, and other big companies that are working on RFID. And we discovered, when I flew over there to Germany to do a sort of a tour of the facility, that they had hidden RFID tags into people's frequent shopper cards and not told them that they were there. And of course, if you have that in your pocket and you're standing in front of a shelf with an RFID reader to tag the products, the RFID reader can be reading you as well. And we have every reason to believe that that's exactly what they were doing. Now, the good news about that is once we brought attention to it, with a big protest there in Germany where people had to hike for about 2 miles in the snow to even get there that day. It was a great event. When we brought attention to it, there were, I believe, 60,000 articles on the internet about this particular trial. The privacy commissioner in Germany actually investigated them and forced them to recall 10,000 of the cards that they had issued, and it turned into a big privacy flap. So we gave the industry yet another black eye in terms of privacy. Gillette is one of the biggest, Gillette and Procter & Gamble are probably the biggest users of RFID now. Gillette had put in a purchase order for 500 million RFID tags, 500 million tags, that they were already beginning to hide into Gillette razor products. So we boycott Gillette. We put up a website at boycottgillette.com where we described how that trial was able to identify when somebody had picked up a package of razor blades from the shelf, and then they used a hidden camera to take a mugshot of every single person who had picked up those razor blades. And when we said, what's going on with that? They said, well, it's an anti-theft measure because a lot of people steal razor blades. And I said, well, how would that help you figure that out? And they said, well, when they got to the check stand, we scanned them again and took another picture of them at the check stand, and if the pictures, matched up, then we knew you paid for the ones you picked up. But if we never saw your face there at the check stand, then we'd take your face and we'd put it up as a mugshot in the security break room or wherever, and we'd know to look for you in the future. Oh my gosh. So they did that at a Walmart store in Brockton, Massachusetts. I actually drove down there and I bought a disposable camera. I forgot to take my camera. I bought a disposable camera at the Walmart, the only Walmart purchase I've made in 10 years, I think. And I went and sure enough, I found the shelf and I crouched down, I was taking pictures of it, and I was telling shoppers, do you know that when you, and then I heard security to aisle 9, and I booked it out of the store. And then I posted it on our website, and I told reporters, I sent it out to our press list and let everybody know. And it's interesting because I got a call from the Brockton, local Brockton newspaper, and they said, really, our store's doing that? That's incredible. Well, I've already contacted Gillette, and they've given me all these comments, and they're really doing it. But when I contacted Walmart, they said, there's no shelf in that store. And she said, and now, when I call back, Gillette's now claiming there's no shelf in the store either. And in fact, they've contacted my editor, and they're trying to angle to get me fired for making up the story. She says, do you have any evidence? And I said, yeah, I've got the pictures from my camera. So I sent the pictures, and they had even denied this to the Boston Globe, to a reporter, sort of a bigger newspaper, and talk about being shamed. And I love their response, because you'll hear this kind of response all the time. They said, "Camera? Oh yeah, that camera. No, we never plugged it in." When confronted with the evidence. So some people get frustrated when that happens. I'm always a little bit encouraged, because when you get a company like Walmart or like Gillette to sort of deny that they're doing something, I'd prefer them do that than come out and say, "Yeah, we have a camera. You want to make something of it? We think it's a great idea. We're proud of it. We're going to do more of it." So that was not the place that we were in 2003, and all the way up until yesterday. And now let me bring you up to speed with what happened yesterday. Yesterday, Walmart announced that after 6 years of battling with my organization and civil liberties and privacy groups that we brought together in a coalition around using RFID in consumer products, that they are going to completely disregard our request that they not put this on individual items. And starting next month, in August of 2010, they're going to start a rollout of 250 million RFID tags onto men's jeans and underwear. Now, this rollout means not only are there going to be tags on the jeans and the underwear in Walmart stores, they're going to be in the hang tags, so you snip them off and throw them away, which they say ameliorates all the privacy concerns. But there are so many issues with this, and let me see if I can describe just a couple of them. One of the issues with having RFID tags on anywhere in a Walmart store other than in the back room is that the RFID tag is associated with a reader. Now, what they want to do is just what they were doing with the Gillette, where they were taking pictures because they could tell when somebody picked something up off the shelf. The way this works, the jeans would each have an RFID tag, the shelf would have a reader, and the shelf would be able to determine 10 pairs of size 8 jeans. When you remove one, it'd go 9 pairs of size 8 jeans. And when they were all gone, it would say, "Oh, we're out of size 8 jeans," and it would call a staff person over to replenish the stock. So they say that they want to do this to keep their stores' shelves stocked. Now here's the problem. There's a bunch of them. One of the problems, when you're standing there in front of that reader is what's known in the industry, and I didn't make this term up, it's known as promiscuous. Meaning, it doesn't just read RFID tags from Walmart, it reads any EPC-based RFID tag. And I know you don't, EPC is electronic product code, which is the barcode replacement code. So that means if you've got an enhanced driver's license or an e-passport in your wallet and you're standing there in the Walmart store in front of that shelf, it's not only reading the jeans, it's reading you. Not only that, but when you're standing in front of that reader is bathing you in electromagnetic radiation. That energy has already been shown in studies coming out of Europe to disrupt DNA. It literally breaks the strands of DNA, to cause reproductive harm and other problems. Walmart envisions having these readers in every shelf in their store down the road. That's bad enough for people who might be shopping in Walmart stores for a couple hours a month, or an hour or so a week, but that's a real problem for the employees who are going to be working in there 40 hours a week, surrounded by these radio waves. Now, let me give you some other problems with that. 250 million RFID tags designed to be disposable. We're talking about electronic circuitry that is an extreme polluter to create. It's an electronic device. It has heavy metals in the antenna. There's silicon. There's all sorts of energy uses associated with creating these things. There's all sorts of water usage when you have to rinse the antenna and etch them out and do all of this. So they're really talking about down the road, and if it's 250 million tags in 1 year to tag just men's jeans and underwear, how many tags would it be to tag every item in every Walmart store? A couple 100 billion, maybe 1 trillion, a huge number of these tags. So they're going to manufacture these in third world countries, which already have poor records of environmental safety, poor records of worker safety. We know that the chemicals used to make these are dangerous. Now you've got a couple 100 billion of these tags winding up in the waste stream. Well, when you clip this thing off and throw it away, there's 2 problems. Number 1, your privacy, and number 2, the environmental impact of these tags. So let me talk privacy first. We found in our book Spy Chips, we've got a whole chapter called Talking Trash, which is kind of a pun about your trash being able someday to talk. We found patents, one of them by Bell South, which is the parent company of Singular Wireless. They wanted to know, when you throw things away, what's in your garbage. So they patented a way at the dump to actually have like a conveyor belt that would go through an RFID reader with your garbage bag. And they would scan all of the RFID tags in your trash. identifying where you bought it, when you threw it away, whether you traveled or not with it, because if I traveled to your house or if I came to Denver with something I bought in New Hampshire and I threw it in the garbage at the DoubleTree, now you know that I was traveling. Or if I had a friend over who threw away a gum packet and the gum packet was associated with her credit card number, the tracking potential here is unbelievable. And in this patent by Bell South, they actually describe how they would take that information and they would sell it. They'd make it available to marketers. They'd make it available across the board. We found another patent for a trash scanner that you can mount on the side of a car. And on garbage day, when people put their garbage bags out on the curb, you could literally drive down the street with your RFID reader and you could pick up and scan all the garbage from somebody's home and associate the contents with that house. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so Walmart says, well, don't worry, you're just going to throw them away. And I said, well, they got plans for that. So that's one problem. Now the second problem is you're going to be throwing away heavy metals and industrial pollutants, tetraethylchloride, I don't even know what it is, PET is in there. You've got adhesives and solvents, all sorts of things in these tags. And when you throw them away and they go to landfills, they're going to be taking heavy metals, literally trillions of tags of heavy metals into the landfill. Or if you throw it in the recycling, you're going to gum up the recycling process. One of the big opponents of this, or one of the groups that's most concerned, are the paper recycling folks. When you have an RFID tag in there, all that metal and that antenna and the plastic gums up all of their screens. They have these filter screens that they use, gums them up, and also contaminates the paper with heavy metals. It's even worse when you put these on plastic recycling or on glass recycling. So we're about to unleash a huge environmental problem in addition to the enormous privacy and civil liberties problems. So this idea of putting these tags on things is just the beginning. Walmart is sort of shooting I don't know, a cannon across the bow of the public right now to see how we're going to respond to this. So the Wall Street Journal had a front page headline story on the newspaper yesterday. I was quoted in that story as opposing this plan, obviously. I'm probably the most outspoken person against this. And Walmart has said that it doesn't really matter to them if consumers oppose it, they're going to do it anyway. So I think we need to take kind of a serious and dramatic step with Walmart and say that we're not going to buy their products as long as they're going to be doing this. And for all of you who shop at Walmart, I want you to realize that every time you spend your shopping dollars in Walmart, you're paying for these devices. You are paying for Walmart to invest in this technology. You are paying Walmart to hire public relations people to fight people like me. You're paying them for lawyers to push this forward. You're paying for lobbyists to go into Congress and fight against any kind of legislation that would require labeling, for example, to tell you where these things are located. So I think it is imperative that we all say to Walmart, not only I'm not going to shop at your store anymore, but I'm going to tell you why. And if you call 1-800-WALMART or you go on their website, there are places where you can express your displeasure at what they're planning on doing. If Walmart gets away with doing this, if they are able to tag these men's jeans and underwear without public opposition, they're going to move to the next step. They're going to tag everything. And the thing about Walmart, it's not only the 800-pound gorilla of the US retail market, it is the biggest retailer on planet Earth. And they're working closely in conjunction with Procter & Gamble, which developed this technology in the first place back in 1999. Procter & Gamble is the biggest consumer product manufacturer on Earth. So if you stood in outer space, let's talk about the mark of the beast for just a moment. If you stood in outer space and you didn't know anything about the Earth, and you looked down, you said, well, what do those people do? Well, they buy stuff. That is true. And what do they buy? Well, they buy stuff from Procter & Gamble. I mean, that would really be your answer because it's the #1 consumer product that we buy. Tide, Cascade, Clairol, Crest, all of that stuff is Procter & Gamble. You'll be amazed at the number of Procter & Gamble products in your home. I have none in mine, but you'd be amazed. Virtually everything you buy is Procter & Gamble. So, oh, and now they own Gillette. They bought Gillette after the RFID trials. They were kind of working together. They bought Gillette. We call them P&G and Gillette, so we call them Piglet. P&G. In my household, we don't use products from either one. By the way, my husband loves Schick razors. He said that was a good transition. He actually prefers them to Gillette since the boycott. So if you said, what do people buy? You'd say, well, they buy Procter & Gamble, Gillette products, Duracell batteries. All of that is part of the same family of companies. And then if you said, well, where do they buy them? Well, the answer would be Walmart across the globe. So Walmart has the power as a retailer. When you want to talk about buying and selling, and now we'll get back to the Bible, when you get into Revelation, and I'll give you a tip for how you can find it in Revelation, the mark of the beast. It's the last book of the Bible, Revelation. It's chapter 13, which most of us associate with kind of a bad number to begin with. And it's the last 3 verses in chapter 13 in the book of Revelation, 16 through 18, which talks about a time when all people, great and small, free and bond, rich and poor, free and bond, or imprisoned or enslaved, will not be able to buy or sell, or will be forced or caused to have a mark on their right hand or their forehead without which they cannot buy and sell. So we now have, let's see if I can recap, we've got the biggest retailer on the globe doing an enormous push into this. We've got the biggest consumer product company on the globe having developed the technology in the first place. We've got enormous companies like IBM which want to create the so-called smarter planet where everything would be embedded with sensors or RFID tags and everything would be tracked all the time. We've got the big credit card companies, which are the primary way in which we buy and sell. So you're in outer space, you say, so they buy Procter & Gamble stuff. What do they buy at Walmart? What do they buy it with? Credit cards. So now you've got the credit cards with the RFID tags in them. And then the only other thing that you really need at that point is for the public to say, well, let's go ahead and make this a real permanent part of ourselves. And if you talk to people in Germany, where they recently did a poll, they said, would you take an RFID implant into your body if it made your shopping easier? And 25% of Germans said, absolutely. So we are, I think, a couple of heartbeats away from being able to do it. And this is amazing to me because for 2,000 years, people have tried to understand that prophecy. You know, you have John out there on the Isle of Patmos. He's in exile. He's an old man living, practically out of a cave in Greece. And he has this vision. And I'm sure that when he saw the vision of Revelation, he said, I don't get that mark part. I don't get how you buy and sell with a number. Because I know this, some of the most brilliant theologians since that time, Isaac Newton, for example, devoted 1 million words written by quill pen and candlelight trying to interpret Revelation, trying to understand what was meant by that. And he couldn't do it. The Bible makes it very clear that the prophecies of the end time are meant to be understood by the people living in that time. And the fact that now, when you ask Isaac Newton, how do you buy and sell with a number? He'd go, let me write a couple thousand pages and try to figure it out. You can ask an 8-year-old child today, how do you buy and sell with a number? I'd use a credit card. We use them all the time. I don't, but most people do. So all of the pieces are fitting together. Now, if you back up, and I've got, this is all covered in our film Shadow Government, which is out at our table, and I'd urge you to get a copy. We talk about not only how the surveillance piece is coming together through the technology, but how the global governance piece is coming together as well. So you've got not only the ability now, technologically speaking, to implement the mark of the beast, but you've also got the political climate moving in that direction. You've got the United Nations doing all kinds of treaties and groups meeting behind the scenes, coming up with these standards. It's the United Nations, by the way, that has now put RFID into every passport of every country on the globe, or is working towards that. That's the UN. You've got something called the Porvoo Group, P-O-R-V-O-O, the Porvoo Group that met in Finland. It's a UN group. And they got together and agreed that every country's identity document should all be standardized into a single global format. And they're working on that right now. So it's all coming together, the governance piece, the technology piece, the enforcement component to it. And it really is just a question, I believe, of, people say to me, Katherine, is Revelation happening tomorrow? Is the mark going to come tomorrow? Or is Christ going to return next week? And I say, well, if you read the Bible, and if you read the book of Revelation, you can determine several things. But one of the things that I'm not worried about is that it's going to happen tomorrow. Because we're missing one piece. Now, when you reread Revelation 13 about the mark of the beast, it's not just a mark to buy and sell, but there's a worship component. There will be a beast or a ruler over this entire globe, and that ruler will not be content with simply telling people what to do politically. He's going to demand to be worshipped. And until we begin seeing the sort of rising up of a global religion, which I don't think is far off, because people are starved, they're spiritually in a wasteland, their hearts are crying out for something. And if they don't know to turn to Jesus Christ, and if they don't turn in that direction, they will be ripe pickings for someone else who rises up and says, worship, it's time. You guys have been out of worship for so long. It's time to come back. So when that begins to happen, that's when I'm going to start thinking, is it time to head for the hills when the worship part comes about? So we do know that we are the first generation living on this globe that has the capability of implementing the mark of the beast, and now it's just a question of which piece happens. You know, how this whole thing plays out next. So what I liken us to, are we going to be able to stop this? Well, we've been able to stop RFID from being rolled out in many, many different trials and over the last probably 6-8 years that I've been working on this topic, 8 years. So we've had a lot of successes. We've kind of fought them back and held them off, but I feel like I've just been kind of buying time because it is going to happen. That doesn't mean that I get to sit back and ignore it. That doesn't mean that I'm going to say, oh, you know, who cares, I'll just be raptured away, like so many people do say. I am going to fight it, I am going to speak out, but let me tell you why. I view us, those of us who are Christian, the body of Christ, and who are informed about what's coming, I view us as sort of the crew on the deck of the Titanic. And if you read the reports about the accounts of what happened on board the Titanic, the first lifeboats that went over the edge went out half empty because people weren't willing. They had the lights on. Everything seemed fine. There was music playing. They were in their ball gowns. Why am I going to get in some dark, cold, dank, you know, nasty rowboat and go out into freezing cold water down there in the dark? I'm not going to do that. This ship isn't really going to go down. What should have happened is the crew, when they went down and they saw the extent of the damage and went, oh my gosh, we're not going to be bailing this one out, they needed to go up and do a better job of warning the people on board the ship so they could have gotten into the lifeboats. And that's sort of where I think we are. I've looked, and I've seen the extent of the hole in the side of the hull of this boat. This ship is going down. That hole was ripped into the side of the ship all the way back in the Garden of Eden. We've been going down ever since. But we're going down really fast and taking out a lot of water really quickly right now. So our job is not really to bail out the water. Our job is to get up on deck and sound the alarm and say, get into the lifeboats. And there's only one lifeboat that will save you in this life, and that is the saving, healing blood of Jesus Christ. That's it. And on that note, do we have time for a couple of questions? Is that all right? Any questions in the audience? Usually RFID kind of sparks questions. Yes? If you have a passport card, you can get rid of it by just getting rid of it. You can cut it up. Once you remove a microchip from the antenna, it can't transmit. So that's good news. If you have anything with an RFID tag and you can find the antenna, just snip it out. You can use a hole punch, you can gouge it out. But as far as those passport cards go, you probably don't want to have one at all. If you need to travel outside of the United States, you can get a regular US passport with the folding cover. And even those, should the microchip fail to work for some reason, like if it got in a backpack full of books and smashed around a little bit with those sensitive electronics, it would still be accepted at border crossings. In the back, yes? Do I have books or videos on the mark of the beast? Let me talk about that for just 1 second. I have our book, Spy Chips, which I believe every single person in this room should get a copy. If there's a financial reason why you can't, talk to me, because I want you to leave with this book and I want you to read it, because we've got to have a body of informed people in this country who understand the immensity of this threat. On the animal microchipping, we're actually creating a new website at chipmenot.com that should be coming up in the next month, where we're going to showcase all of the animals that have passed away from these microchips, kind of create a little shrine for them. And then we're also going to be putting a place where people can report their own stories and try to get that out to veterinarians. We have anti-chipping legislation out front. It's a one-page PDF. It's called the Bodily Integrity Act, and it is a law that I'd love to see passed right now in every state in the country before anybody seriously proposes chipping people with implants. This would head it off at the pass. All right, so there's our book. Critics say it is hilarious. My co-author, Liz McIntyre, is an absolutely side-splittingly funny writer, and it's a fast-moving book. It's got Elvis Presley and whipped cream and talking plants. So you won't be bored reading it, I'll put it that way, because a lot of times people go, radio frequency is going to be really boring and I'm not a technician. You don't have to be. Regular people can understand the book. And when you're done reading it, you will be an expert on what's happening in today's headline news with regard to Walmart, and you can understand why we're battling against them. All right, so I'll be signing books. I have spy chips out there. I have Shadow Government, which is a great way to introduce somebody who thinks you're just a conspiracy nut or this stuff isn't happening. Show them Shadow Government, because we have a lot of Harvard professors. We've got very distinguished scholars, and they're all saying the exact same thing. So it's very compelling for the critics who don't understand what's happening. And by the time you get to the end, it's really nice, because the last 5 minutes, once they're really scared, they go, oh my gosh, you're telling the truth, I didn't know. Then it's got Grant Jeffrey, Christian author Grant Jeffrey, carrying a Bible and saying, this was predicted 2,000 years ago, and the answers are in this book. He's not heavy-handed Christian, just enough right at the end to kind of let people see where the answers come in. Now, as far as a Christian book, you had asked about books about the mark of the beast. I have a video that I did a couple of years ago called On the Brink of the Mark, and that's available. It's probably not the absolute latest information, but it is out there, and I think it's pretty good. The other thing I'm working on right now is a children's book that kind of brings this whole circle back to my grandmother. When in the 1960s and 70s, preachers talked about the mark of the beast all the time. And nowadays, they won't breathe a word of it because they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to be humiliated. So no one's telling our children. I've talked to kids who've gone to Sunday school every Sunday and have gone to VBS every summer, and they've never even heard of the mark of the beast. They don't even know what it is. The only place they've heard about it is in rock music and satanic lyrics. So we are raising a generation that does not understand the threat and has not made the kind of promise that I made when I was 8. And by the way, had I not made that promise, I don't know if I'd be a Christian today. I mean, it really was my grandmother's telling me that, and when I began to see it, I said, I've got to pick up my Bible because everything in it is true. So I've created a book that is designed for children ages 4 to 10 that is about the mark of the beast, and in it, it has a contract that says, I promise that I will never take the mark of the beast, that I will never worship anyone but God, and I will call on Jesus Christ to help me keep my promise. And I've actually had this, I've read it to 4-year-olds, and they've said, I'll sign that. So I would love to see every parent and every Christian grandparent in this country get a copy of that book, read it to their children, and out front on the computer monitor that I have out there, you can actually see some pictures from the book. We've got about 90% of the illustrations are painted. It's beautiful, and I'm really looking forward to that coming out, hopefully around Christmas time. And there's a sign-up sheet, so if you want to be on the mailing list to get information about that when it comes out, it's right there. And then the other thing you'll notice when you go out to the table where I'm sitting is I'm in front of a big booth that says Start Page. And the reason it says Start Page, and I could do a whole other hour or two on Google. If you're using Google, you need to stop immediately. Google's founders have said that they want to essentially do a mind meld with each of us. When they were asked what they wanted to become, they said they wanted to become the mind of God. And that's a quote. Google has quietly amassed the biggest dossier of personal information ever created in the history of civilization on every single one of us in this room. Google knows everything you search for. They know all your medical conditions. They know if you've looked up divorce attorneys or drug counseling. They make a record of all of it. And in fact, Google is not a search engine. And I'm going to surprise you by saying that. Google is a lure. It's bait to get you to go in and multiple times a day type whatever's on your mind into their big data collection trap. They are collecting your data. Gmail reads every single email you write and receive. They take the keywords out of your email and they put it in that profile. And Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, recently said that they do record everything that you search for. If you don't want them knowing it, you shouldn't be searching for it. And that they would turn it over to the federal government if they got a Patriot Act request. And in light of some of the things we've been talking about today, the sorts of things that are being identified as potential domestic terrorism, can I tell you that in the Missouri Information Awareness Center report, where they identified, law enforcement said who they thought were potential domestic terrorists, they said anybody with an interest in RFID. So I guess everybody in this room now, because you sat here and listened to an hour of me talking about it, I guess that makes you a potential domestic terrorist. So don't go going on Google and searching for RFID, because they're making a list of that stuff, I kid you not. So when I found that out, I said, I don't care if it means I have to quit my job and not even use the internet anymore. I'm not using Google again. And I searched everywhere, and I finally found this fabulous company, Start Page. They are third-party certified. They're run by wonderful people. I've broken bread with them. They care deeply about privacy. They don't record your IP address. They don't make a record of any of your searches, and they are completely private. And we're doing demos out there to actually show you how to use it. So I want everybody in this room, the next time you go on Google, I want you to feel guilty because you're feeding the beast. Google really is becoming I guess, sort of like the mind of God in that very humanist sort of way. They want to know everything. pictures of your house, satellite images of your backyard, drive-by scans of your Wi-Fi information. They're collecting it all. So I would encourage everybody, startpage.com is an alternative. And then the final thing I'll say, and then I'll move on, is I do a daily 2-hour radio program every afternoon from 2 to 4 p.m. here in Mountain Time. I broadcast from my studio in New Hampshire. You can find my radio information on a little flyer out front, but it's just my name, KatherineAlbrecht.com. You can listen live on your computer screen, and there's even a phone number you can dial in and just put it on your speakerphone, and you can hear the show streaming 24 hours a day. Downloadable MP3 podcasts, etc. And every day what I do is I peruse the news, I comb through what's happening, and I give you the big picture that's going on. And if there's one thing that I've prayed for in this journey, in addition to saying, Lord, use me for whatever I can do, is I've prayed for discernment to be able to see what's happening in these times and understand how it all ties together in the big picture. All right, we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Yes? Yes, this was Joe Biden's question to Justice Roberts. That's right. Mark my words, you'll be ruling on implantable microchips. That's right, into human beings. We also know that Tommy Thompson, who was the former Secretary of Health and Human Services under the Bush administration, took a job on the board of directors for the Verichip Corporation, and he actually said, here's the highest ranking public health official on earth, he said he looked forward to the day when we would all have microchips implanted in our bodies to manage our electronic medical records. And that's a government official. So. Well, they're talking about a national ID by 2014 with obesity ratings and all sorts of information on us. That's all going to be tied in with an electronic health record, and that will probably be microchip based. They'll probably start out in a card though, but it probably is going in that direction. One more, and then I gotta, yeah. Yeah, they're installing RFID readers in lots of public spaces along the roads, and trucks are now using them for tracking. So you're going to start seeing this stuff coming up more and more. That's why I encourage everybody to read Spy Chips so you understand what's happening. We have chapters about transportation tracking, tracking in stores, tracking of garbage, tracking of people, implants. It's all in there. There's a separate chapter on each one. Thank you all for coming.